What happens when America's sweetheart of home design meets daytime television's most beloved host, and everything goes catastrophically wrong? What you're about to witness is one of the most shocking celebrity confrontations ever caught on live television. Joanna Gaines, the woman who built an empire on farmhouse chic and family values, completely loses her composure on the Drew Barrymore Show in a way that nobody saw coming. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone slightly awkward. This is a full-blown explosion that left the studio audience gasping and Drew Barrymore herself visibly shaken. The setup seemed innocent enough. Joanna Gaines was scheduled for what should have been a routine promotional appearance on the Drew Barrymore Show. She was there to talk about her latest book, share design tips, and charm the audience with stories about life with Chip and the kids. Drew Barrymore, known for her warm interviewing style, came prepared for what she thought would be a delightful conversation about home and family. But from the moment Joanna walked onto the set, something felt off. Those in the studio described a tension that hung in the air like a storm, waiting to burst. Joanna's smile looked forced, her posture rigid, and her voice lacked its usual warmth. Drew greeted her enthusiastically, praising Magnolia and asking how she manages to make everything look so effortless. Joanna's reply carried an unusual edge. She made it clear that nothing about building her brand had been effortless, and her tone hinted at frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Drew brushed past the tension and shifted the conversation towards storytelling through home design. But Joanna's response was even sharper. Her emphasis on privacy, authenticity, and being left alone signaled that something was deeply wrong. Drew attempted to steer the interview towards celebrity families and how they handle speculation in the media. That was the breaking point. Joanna's entire demeanor hardened as she accused Drew's network of pushing false narratives about her marriage for months. The studio fell silent. Drew looked stunned as Joanna called the interview an ambush, claiming producers had tried repeatedly to get her to discuss rumors about her marriage. Drew insisted she had no idea, explaining she avoids being briefed on controversial material, so conversations feel organic. But Joanna wasn't having it. Her voice cut with accusation, frustration, and betrayal. The tension escalated. Audience members started whispering or pulling out their phones. Drew tried to regain control, apologizing and insisting she'd never intentionally ambush a guest. Joanna stood abruptly, calling the entire daytime TV format manipulative and accusing Drew's team of using trust to extract vulnerable content. Drew was sweating, shaking, nearly breaking under the pressure as Joanna's anger grew more direct, exposing cracks in an industry built on curated intimacy. Joanna's voice rose as she explained how deeply hurt she felt by the interview setup. She accused the show of bringing her there under false pretenses, claiming they wanted to promote her book while secretly hoping to get her to address rumors about her marriage. Drew tried to defend herself, saying she would never exploit someone's personal struggles for content. But her voice trembled with fear and confusion. Joanna reminded her that regardless of intentions, the cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment for the world to consume. Even the apology was being documented. Drew looked toward her producers for help, but they stayed frozen. Joanna sat back down, rigid, declaring they should keep rolling to give the audience exactly what they came for. She described the pain of building a life with someone she loved while strangers tried to pick it apart. She explained the exhausting reality of having every public appearance analyzed for signs of trouble. Drew tried to empathize, but Joanna cut her off, saying Drew had turned her own vulnerabilities, her divorces, mental health, and struggles, into content. Joanna's message was clear. What Drew chose to share about herself did not give her the right to push others to do the same. The accusation struck hard. Drew insisted she shared her story to help people feel less alone. Joanna acknowledged that, but said the real issue was that the industry rewarded emotional exposure. Guests who protected their boundaries were labeled cold or difficult. There was no winning. Drew asked how they could fix this, and Joanna said the conversations needed to happen behind the scenes, before guests were put in uncomfortable situations. She criticized the system, not just the show, saying daytime TV thrived on manufactured intimacy disguised as empathy. Drew nodded, absorbing every criticism. She seemed to genuinely understand, but also overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Joanna was addressing. Joanna predicted that headlines would portray her as the difficult guest who had a meltdown. She emphasized how narratives were shaped. Instantly, producers, already imagining sensational titles, Drew quietly asked what would happen next. Joanna said she would leave the set with whatever dignity she had left and expected the interview to be aired without dramatic editing or manipulative framing. Drew promised to treat the footage respectfully, though she looked terrified of what the fallout would be. Joanna gathered her things, preparing to leave, but then paused and looked back at Drew. The pause held an intensity that made everyone in the studio tense. Joanna spoke in a calm, unsettling tone, saying she felt sorry for Drew. Drew's eyes widened as Joanna explained that Drew had been conditioned by the industry to believe intimacy was entertainment. She said Drew's genuine empathy made her even more vulnerable to participating in harmful systems without realizing it. Drew tried to defend herself, saying she truly cared about her guests. Joanna acknowledged that but pointed out that sincerity itself could become part of the manipulation. When people trust Drew, they share more, and that vulnerability becomes content. Drew's face crumpled as Joanna explained that the show's format turned personal pain into a commodity. The audience was silent, absorbing a critique of the entire daytime TV industry happening live. Drew looked shaken, asking whether she was supposed to quit her job or stop trying to connect. Joanna said she needed to reflect on whether the connection she created helped her guests or only boosted ratings. She pointed out that Drew had built her career on intimacy, but that intimacy had been packaged and sold. Drew recoiled, visibly devastated. For the first time, Drew admitted she didn't know how to turn off the performance, saying she didn't know how to just be a person instead of a host. Joanna's expression softened briefly, calling it the saddest thing Drew had said. Drew asked if Joanna could help her figure out how to do better. Joanna shook her head, saying it wasn't her responsibility. She was a guest who came to promote a book, not a therapist or a coach. Joanna began walking away, but Drew asked again how she could change things. Joanna said she needed to have serious conversations with producers about boundaries, stop rewarding trauma sharing, and accept that some conversations belonged in private, not on camera. Drew nodded desperately, saying she understood and wanted to improve. But Joanna questioned whether Drew truly meant it or whether she was still performing for the audience, still thinking about optics even in a moment of crisis. That accusation hit Drew harder than anything else. She admitted she didn't know how to separate genuine emotion from performance anymore. She didn't know where Drew the human ended and Drew the host began. Joanna looked at her with a mix of sadness and resignation, saying it wasn't her job to fix that. Joanna reached the edge of the set and paused one final time. She turned back and told Drew she hoped she figured things out because she had a platform that could genuinely help people if she used it responsibly. Joanna said the potential for good was enormous, but the temptation to exploit vulnerability was always lurking. She warned that if Drew didn't learn to separate authenticity from performance, the entire structure of her show would crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. The studio remained frozen, no one daring to move. Drew sat trembling in her chair, her eyes swollen from crying, absorbing the final blow. Joanna didn't soften her tone. She explained that fame had created a warped reality where authenticity was packaged, edited, and sold, and Drew had unknowingly become both a victim and an enforcer of that system. She said the only way to create meaningful connection was to stop performing altogether, a nearly impossible task in the world Drew lived in. Drew whispered that she truly wanted to change, that she didn't want to hurt people or use their pain as entertainment. Joanna acknowledged that wanting change wasn't the same as doing the work. She reminded Drew that future guests depended on her willingness to rebuild her show's culture from the ground up. A single heartfelt conversation wouldn't fix anything. Drew needed to restructure how interviews were planned, how producers communicated with publicists, and how boundaries were respected. Joanna's critique wasn't cruel, it was painfully honest. She emphasized that Drew didn't have to stop connecting with people. She just had to stop centering that connection around extracting emotional disclosures. She needed to create an environment where guests felt safe to promote their work without fear of being blindsided by personal questions. Drew nodded slowly, almost childlike in her vulnerability. The crew remained silent, recognizing they were witnessing a turning point not just for the show, but possibly for daytime TV as a whole. Joanna placed her bag over her shoulder and stepped off the set. Her departure felt heavy, final, and symbolic. Drew sat motionless long after Joanna left, staring at the doorway with a mixture of heartbreak and awakening. The audience didn't clap. They didn't move. They simply watched as the reality of what had happened settled around them. Drew eventually stood, wiping her eyes, realizing the segment would air exactly as it unfolded, raw, painful, and transformative. She knew Joanna was right. The only path forward was to rebuild everything from scratch, to confront the industry she'd spent her life navigating, and to redefine what authenticity truly meant when cameras were rolling.